Will the Rudd government's fiscal stimulus package stave off a recession? With so many Australians hurting, from pensioners to carers to superannuants to families to Aborigines, the Prime Minister appears to be expressing concern for everyone, with the exception of the opposition, who say he could have acted sooner. And as we've seen in the news, there have been massive swings against Labor in elections in the ACT and New South Wales. Well, joining us now is the Shadow Families and Indigenous Affairs Minister, Tony Abbott. Welcome, Mr Abbott, to Sunday Agenda.
Morning, Helen.
Now, let's first talk about the elections in the ACT and New South Wales. Labor suffered very badly in most of those elections. Labor in the ACT will need Greens to support them to form government. There's been a huge swing against Labor in 3 New South Wales by-elections. Now, this continues an electoral trend that started in the Northern Territory, 9 weeks ago. Why is Labor so on the nose around most states and territories in the country?
Because they're doing a poor job, Helen, that's why. It's easy to make promises in opposition, but in government you've got to deliver. And Labor governments have not delivered. That's the problem.
OK, well, the New South Wales Premier Nathan Rees has said that he will rebuild Labor credibility brick by brick. Now, is that possible for him?
I think it's going to be very, very difficult because it's now a 13-year-old Labor government. They're on to their 3rd Premier. The New South Wales right machine is mired in corruption and nepotism allegations. I really think that the Labor brand in New South Wales has been well and truly trashed, and that's obviously going to have an impact federally as well as here in New South Wales.
All right, well, there were implications for your side of politics also in those by-elections. The Nationals failed to win the New South Wales North Coast seat of Port Macquarie, and the Nationals have accused the federal Liberals of undermining their campaign by saying that federal Liberals, certain elements, helped campaign for the opposition, in a sense, the independent. Now, is this true?
Look, I'm not very familiar with the situation on the ground in Port Macquarie, but certainly these are not easy times for the National Party. Demographic change is impacting on them more than on any other political party, and frankly, the talk of merger, I think that's disconcerting some Nationals as well. So I think that the problems in Port Macquarie are local problems, and I'd like to just leave them there if that's okay,
but
Helen.
They do imply, I mean, they have accused your side of undermining their campaign. Now, did your side undermine their campaign or not? Were federal Liberals helping to support, hand out how-to-vote cards for the independent guy?
As I said, I'm no great expert on what happened in Port Macquarie.
You must know internally whether anyone from any one of your federal colleagues was helping up there.
I certainly think it is a pity that there wasn't a Liberal candidate up there. I think it was a pity there wasn't a Liberal candidate up there. I think we might have had a better outcome if there was a Liberal candidate up there. But look, that was a decision that was made by the people here in New South Wales, and it had an outcome, or we've had an outcome, but overwhelmingly this is a terrible outcome for the Labor Party, a very bad outcome for Premier Rees, and not a great outcome for Prime Minister Rudd.
Let's turn to the financial crisis. The ANZ Bank and Aussie Home Loans have both announced that they are cutting interest rates again on mortgage loans. Do you think there'll be more interest rate cuts from other banks in the next few days, this week?
Look, let's wait and see. Certainly we are going through difficult and challenging times. I think at the moment what we don't want is anything that causes nervous people to do things in fear and panic. And I don't want to say anything that looks like it's adding to this general air of crisis, which I think a lot of people are feeling at the moment.
Well, can I ask you, do you think Kevin Rudd is perhaps playing with fire by being, in essence, the big bank's new best friend?
I think it's important to support the banks, but we're getting very mixed signals from Kevin Rudd. On the one hand, he's guaranteeing bank deposits, he's guaranteeing interbank loans, and that's fine. But at the same time, he's playing the populist card with attacking so-called extreme capitalism and so-called greedy salaries, but he doesn't define what extreme capitalism is. He doesn't say what quantum is greedy. I mean, I think that's part of the problem. You've got a lot of people sending a lot of mixed messages. Last week, our banks were sound, our economy was strong, everything was light years away from the situation in America. This week, he's got to spend half the surplus in one hit. So,
do you not support him spending half the surplus? Do you not support the fiscal stimulus package?
I certainly don't begrudge the benefits for people who are doing it tough, although I note that quite a lot of people have missed out as part of the fiscal package. But I think it would be much easier to trust the government, much easier to believe that this is a government that acts on the basis of evidence, not polls, if he had actually been a bit more upfront with the advice that he was getting from Treasury.
Well, that advice could have changed though, don't you think? I mean, it appears like the last 10 days there has been another major unravelling of this. Do you think the fiscal stimulus package will help stave off a recession in this country?
Well, let's hope so, because that's the last thing anyone wants. But if the advice from Treasury has changed in the last 10 days, Kevin Rudd should tell us what it is. He said he was going to level with the Australian people, but if he won't level with us about the Treasury advice, he's not really being fair dinkum. He tells us all about these conversations he's having with world leaders. Let's hear a bit more about the conversations he's having with Treasury officials.
Treasurer Wayne Swan told the Weekend Australian yesterday that the collapse of the world markets was like a freight train that could mow down nations. Now, you know, that's very strong language. And that he also said the government stands ready to boost the $10 billion package if needs be. Now, if they want to go further into the surplus, will you support them on that?
Well, my fear is that this time next year, we will be deep in deficit, and my fear is that what this government is doing is building up a long-term structural deficit. Don't forget that Kevin Rudd has already more or less promised a permanent $30 a week increase in pensions, which he's told us is going to cost something like $6 billion a year.
Which your side called for as well.
Well, yes, but we didn't call for that on top of all these other things
Will you support him if he has to go further into the surplus?
Well, let's wait and see what happens. But the point is, at the moment, we have a lot of people who seem to be talking up a crisis. Now,
so you don't think there is a crisis?
Certainly, we are in difficult and challenging times. But the last thing we want to do is to further damage confidence.
But on the other hand, you're asking him to fess up to the people and be honest.
Let's face it, Helen. All of us are actors in any economic problem. I mean, all of us are spenders, savers, investors, and this isn't something that's happening to other people. It's potentially happening to us, and I think we all want to be reasonably hopeful about the future, not too gloomy about the future, and that's why language is important, particularly the language that Prime Ministers and Treasurers use.
The Prime Minister has also more or less declared war on the greed of individuals who may have caused this, not necessarily here. But would you support him in his bid to try and impose limits of some kind on executive salaries, as well as proper regulation or better regulation or tougher regulation around corporate governance for banking?
I certainly share the general view that some salaries border on obscene. But on the other hand, I think in the end it's for shareholders to determine these things. The shareholders elect the directors. The directors set the CEO's salary. The CEO determines the salaries of other people, and I really think that we should let the shareholders do their job. And the problem with all of this is that, again, it panders to populism in a way that I don't think is going to be helpful in the long run. I mean, these so-called greedy bankers are going to be the people that we need to help us through all these current times.
If I can ask you to put your Indigenous Affairs hat on, the review into the Northern Territory intervention has run into quite a lot of flack. A member of the expert panel who was assisting the review attacked the report, saying it was overly emotive and recommended the perpetuation of a slow form of genocide. Now, do you agree with that?
I support the intervention. I very strongly support the intervention, and I support the intervention in its original form.
So you don't want any watering down? Do you feel this review may be watering it down?
That's the problem with the report of the review board. It recommends the end of welfare quarantining, and if welfare quarantining goes, effectively the intervention's gone. And I would want to make it very clear to the government that there would be no bipartisanship whatsoever if welfare quarantine is to be scrapped. And I think the sensible people in Indigenous Affairs, people like Warren Mundine, even Marion Scrimgeour, who originally labelled the intervention an invasion, has said that the intervention is working and that it shouldn't be watered down, it shouldn't be changed. So I think we should stick with those people. I think they know what they're talking about. In fact,
Marion Scrimgeour and the Northern Territory government has also asked the federal government to not wind back the forced income quarantining system. So you support them in that?
Absolutely right. I mean, they are the people who are...
What is it doing, do you think? Why is it effective in your view?
It's effective because it means that at least 50% of the income in these places is being spent on the necessities of life, and that means it can't be spent on booze, gambling, cigarettes and drugs. Now, it was the booze and the drugs that were destroying these places, because the booze was leading to the violence, which was creating the nightmare. So make sure the money is spent on the right things, and these places will get better.
All right, just briefly, what about a system as happens in Queensland, where they've put in place a Families Responsibilities Commission, where basically you get your money if you do certain basic things for your family? Would that be a better system in the Northern Territory?
The short answer is no, Helen. Look, I can understand why people like the Cape York system. The Cape York system is a system which has been recommended by the communities after a lot of consultation. It is, if you like, a consensus way forward. But, you know, I think in these places the situation is too dire to wait for a consensus. I have been in one of the Cape York communities where that form of family income management is in place. And sure, the families are sending their kids to school. That's great. But there's still far too much money being spent on alcohol. There are still far too many social problems in these places, and that's why I would prefer to see an automatic welfare quarantine rather than have to wait for bad behaviour to be determined by a Family Responsibilities Commission. Okay. And if people are worried about singling out Aboriginal people, extend the welfare quarantine to all welfare-dependent families with children, black and white, right around Australia. And that eliminates this idea that we might be singling out Aboriginal people for harsh treatment.
Well, that's a big issue you've just thrown in at the end of the interview there. What you want forced income this way to happen right across the board around Australia for anyone who accepts welfare.
Helen, I've been talking about compulsory quarantining for welfare-dependent families with children for several months now. I think it would make sense, because let's face it, if you do have dependent children and you are on welfare and you're not spending 50% of your income on the necessities of life, you're not fair income.
Okay, Tony Abbott, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Helen.